Welcome to Flash Bible Stories, where we bring the most intense, eye-opening stories from the Bible straight to you. Today, we are diving deep into one of the most graphic and haunting stories in Scripture, the death of King Ahaziah of Judah. His life was full of mistakes, bad alliances, and a final judgment that was shocking and gruesome. How did the king's life end in such a horrific way? What can we learn from it? Stay tuned to the very end of this powerful story, and don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments below and subscribe to Flash Bible Stories. Ahaziah was a king who might not be as well known as David or Solomon, but his life is a powerful lesson that should never be overlooked. To fully grasp the significance of his tragic end, we need to understand where it all began. Ahaziah wasn't just an ordinary ruler. He was born into royalty, the son of Jehoram, the king of Judah, and Athaliah, the daughter of Ahab and Jezebel. And yes, you're right to remember those names. Ahab and Jezebel were infamous for leading Israel into idol worship, disobedience, and complete rebellion against God. Ahaziah was only 22 years old when he took the throne. His youth, however, didn't shield him from the heavy burden of leadership. His reign would last only a single year, but the choices he made during that short time would seal his fate in the most gruesome way imaginable. Ahaziah is a perfect example of how aligning yourself with the wrong people, making poor decisions, and turning away from God can lead to a devastating outcome. But before we get to the heart-wrenching part of his story, let's explore the journey that led him there. This story is more than just about one man's downfall. It's a cautionary tale for us all. Stay tuned to the end because there's a lot to unpack here. From the moment Ahaziah stepped onto the throne, he seemed destined to fail. He had inherited the throne of Judah, a kingdom with a rich history of kings who had either walked in the ways of God or strayed far from his commands. Sadly, Ahaziah fell into the latter category. The Bible tells us that Ahaziah did evil in the sight of the Lord as the house of Ahab had done. 2 Chronicles 22:3. But why? How did he, a king of Judah, end up walking the same path as the corrupt kings of Israel? The answer lies in his family. Ahaziah's mother, Athaliah, was a powerful influence on him. She was the daughter of Ahab and Jezebel, two of the most wicked rulers in Israel's history. Ahab and Jezebel had introduced Baal worship on a massive scale, and their defiance of God led to a cascade of destruction throughout Israel. Athaliah brought this same spirit of rebellion and idol worship into Judah, and her son, Ahaziah, followed her lead. Ahaziah chose to embrace the evil practices of his maternal family. He was drawn into the same sinful behaviors that led to the downfall of his predecessors. He turned his back on the God of his ancestors, the same God who had rescued the Israelites from Egypt, parted the Red Sea, and brought them into the Promised Land. Instead, he chose the idols of Baal, and with that choice, he sealed his fate. But it wasn't just the worship of false gods that led to Ahaziah's destruction, it was the alliances he forged. Ahaziah had aligned himself with the house of Ahab, and this relationship would soon become the cause of his downfall. He was bound by the same curse that had fallen upon Ahab's household. His reign was destined for a tragic end, but the events leading up to his death were just as dramatic as the final moments. One of the most defining moments of Ahaziah's reign was his alliance with King Joram, also called Jehoram of Israel. Joram was not just any king. He was Ahaziah's uncle, the son of Ahab and Jezebel, making him yet another product of a deeply corrupt lineage. The two kings decided to join forces in a military campaign against King Hazael of Aram. It seemed like a wise move at the time, uniting two kingdoms to face a common enemy. But this alliance was rooted in all the wrong motives. In fact, this decision to fight alongside Joram is what would ultimately lead Ahaziah directly into his own death sentence. You see, both Ahaziah and Joram were part of the house of Ahab, a dynasty that God had already condemned. Their fates were intertwined with the evil legacy left by their ancestors. By aligning himself with Joram, Ahaziah was essentially signing his own death warrant. The two kings went into battle against Hazael's forces, but the campaign did not go as planned. Joram was severely wounded in the fight and retreated to Jezreel to recover. Ahaziah, ever loyal to his uncle, decided to visit him. Little did Ahaziah know that this visit would be his last. While Ahaziah was busy visiting his wounded uncle in Jezreel, something monumental was happening elsewhere. God had raised up a new leader, Jehu, a commander in the army of Israel. But Jehu wasn't just any military leader. He had been chosen by God to carry out a very specific mission, the complete and utter destruction of the house of Ahab. Jehu was not a man to be taken lightly. He was fierce, determined, and unflinchingly loyal to the mission God had given him. In fact, when the prophet Elisha sent one of his servants to anoint Jehu as king and give him the divine mandate to eliminate Ahab's descendants, Jehu immediately sprang into action. He gathered his men and set off on a whirlwind mission to wipe out anyone associated with Ahab's lineage. His first target, King Joram of Israel. Jehu sped to Jezreel, where Joram was recuperating from his battle wounds. As Jehu approached, Joram was completely unaware of the danger coming his way, but God's judgment was moving swiftly, and there was no escaping it. Meanwhile, Ahaziah was blissfully unaware of the unfolding events. His focus was on visiting Joram, who was still recovering in Jezreel. He likely thought it was a simple act of familial loyalty, a visit to check on his uncle's condition. But what he didn't know was that Jehu was on his way, and he wasn't coming for a friendly chat. As Ahaziah entered Jezreel, he found himself caught in the middle of a divine crossfire. Jehu had arrived with a singular purpose: to eliminate Joram. In a swift and brutal encounter, Jehu shot Joram with an arrow, and Joram's body was thrown into the field of Naboth, the very field Ahab and Jezebel had stolen years before. It was poetic justice, a clear sign that God's judgment was being fulfilled. But Ahaziah's troubles were far from over. As soon as he realized what had happened to his uncle, panic set in. He knew Jehu was not going to stop with Joram. Ahaziah quickly ordered his chariot and fled the scene. He was young, scared, and now running for his life. As Ahaziah raced away from Jezreel, his heart must have been pounding. He had just witnessed the violent death of his uncle, and now he was the next target. But no matter how fast he rode, he could not outrun God's judgment. Jehu's men, skilled and relentless, pursued him with fierce determination. They knew their mission, and they weren't about to let Ahaziah slip away. Near the city of Megiddo, Jehu's men caught up with the fleeing king. Ahaziah's chariot was no match for the speed and skill of Jehu's forces. In a swift and decisive attack, they struck him down. He was gravely wounded, but somehow, Ahaziah managed to escape to Megiddo, where he would spend his final moments. Ahaziah's flight to Megiddo was his last act of desperation. His body was failing him. The wounds inflicted by Jehu's men were severe, and there was no escaping the inevitable. But this was no ordinary death. It was a slow, agonizing process, and the Bible spares no details in describing the graphic nature of his demise. As Ahaziah lay in agony, his body began to give way. His intestines spilled out, a horrifying and painful end for a man who had chosen the path of rebellion against God. His death was not just a physical tragedy, it was the fulfillment of divine judgment. God had decreed the destruction of the house of Ahab, and though Ahaziah was king of Judah, his association with that cursed family sealed his fate. Ahaziah's death was not just a personal punishment, it was a public display of what happens when a leader chooses evil over righteousness. The people who witnessed his death would have been struck by the sheer horror of it. This was a king who could have led his people toward God, but instead he led them astray. And now, his life was ending in the most painful, humiliating way possible. After Ahaziah's gruesome death, Judah was left in turmoil. The young king's reign had been short-lived, but the chaos didn't end with his passing. His mother, Athaliah, seized the opportunity to take control of the kingdom. Athaliah, the daughter of Jezebel, brought with her the same ruthless spirit that had plagued Israel. Athaliah's rise to power marked yet another dark chapter in the history of Judah. She didn't hesitate to consolidate her power by eliminating anyone who could challenge her, including members of her own family. For 6 long years she ruled with an iron fist, promoting the worship of Baal and further leading the people away from the true God. But even in this time of darkness, God's plan was still in motion. He would eventually raise up a new king, one who would restore the line of David and bring Judah back to him. But for now, the kingdom was left to grapple with the consequences of Ahaziah's poor choices and Athaliah's ruthless ambition. Ahaziah's life and death are a sobering reminder that no one is above God's judgment. His story is one of missed opportunities, poor decisions, and tragic consequences. As a king, he had the power to lead his people toward God, to establish righteousness in the land of Judah. but instead he followed the path of his wicked ancestors, choosing rebellion over obedience, idolatry over worship, and alliances with the corrupt over loyalty to the Lord. Ahaziah's death wasn't just a personal tragedy, it was a message to all who would hear it. When we choose to turn away from God, when we align ourselves with evil, the consequences are often severe and unavoidable. His intestines spilling out may seem like a graphic detail, but it underscores the gravity of his rebellion. This wasn't just an accident or a random misfortune, it was the fulfillment of God's righteous judgment. As we reflect on the story of Ahaziah, we are reminded of the importance of walking in the ways of the Lord. Power, wealth, and status are meaningless if they are not used in service of God's will. Ahaziah had everything a king could want, but in the end, it all amounted to nothing. His legacy was one of pain, suffering, and judgment. Let us learn from his mistakes and choose the path of righteousness, for it is only by walking with God that we find true peace and lasting purpose. Thank you for joining us on this journey through one of the most graphic and sobering stories in the Bible. The tragic death of King Ahaziah is a powerful reminder that no one, no matter their power, position, or lineage, is beyond the reach of God's judgment. His intestines spilling out might seem like a shocking detail, but it is a reflection of the severity of his rebellion. As you reflect on this story, consider how its lessons apply to your own life. Are there areas where you've chosen rebellion over obedience? Have you aligned yourself with people or values that lead you away from God? The story of Ahaziah reminds us to take stock of our choices and return to the path of righteousness. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to leave your comments below. Let us know what you think about Ahaziah's life and the lessons we can draw from it. And don't forget to subscribe to Flash Bible Stories for more thrilling and powerful tales from the Word of God. We have so many more exciting and impactful stories to share with you. Until next time, keep walking in the light of God's truth.